The Mvskoke people come from a very sophisticated culture known as the mound builders. Using baskets, the people would build thousands of large mounds for ceremonies and to honor the ancestors, and are part of the Mississippian culture. The Mvskoke were agricultural, growing corn, squash, and potatoes. They built their houses out of a form of adobe and covered with reeds. They developed artifacts that are still being studied today as part of the Southeastern Ceremonial Complex. In 1540, De Soto invaded the Mvskoke, as the conquistadors had invaded the Aztec and Inca in search of gold. He would enslave tribal members to carry supplies and equipment, and often took the chiefs hostage. The invasion brought measles and smallpox, which caused great death among the Mvskoke. Following Spain, other Europeans began trading with the Creeks. Some of them started taking Mvskoke as slaves and thus generated further warfare. In fact, the state that took natives as slaves was South Carolina, which was the birthplace of Andrew Jackson and John Calhoun, two men who would write the Indian Removal Act. In 1733, the British started sending convicts to settle Georgia. In 1763, the French and Indian War broke out. Chief Alexander McGillivray remained loyal to the Britain during the American Revolution. He led attacks on Georgia in 1779. In 1790, the Treaty of New York was signed. New York, a tribal town, derives its name from this event. In 1796, Benjamin Hawkins is sent to the Creeks and begins to encourage the tribe to set aside his former government and assimilate, or become like Americans with Christianity and English speaking. The lower Creeks, some of them agreed. In 1811, Tecumseh, whose mother was Creek, began opposing the new United States with British help. Soon, some Upper Creeks joined his cause, and they declared war on the United States.
He chose the 39th Infantry, his only unit of highly disciplined soldiers, to lead the barricade assault. Before sending the 39th forward with their bayonets, Jackson determined to blow a hole in the wall with his cannon. At 10:30 in the morning, Jackson ordered his cannoneers to commence firing. For 2 hours, they hurled 6 and 3-pound iron shot at the logs, but to no avail. The defenses held. Behind the barricade, nearly 1,000 warriors stood as cannonballs slammed into the dirt and logs or punched through the wall, killing those on the other side. They shouted defiantly at the army assembled to their front, challenging the soldiers to meet them in hand-to-hand combat. Of the 1,000 Red Sticks assembled for the battle, perhaps a third possessed a musket or rifle. The rest held bows, arrows, tomahawks, and war clubs. Meanwhile, across the river from the village of Tohopoka, one of Coffee's Cherokee warriors named Tukwa, later known as the Whale, did something entirely unexpected. Hearing cannon fire in the distance and afraid he would miss the fight, Tukwa slipped into the river with 2 companions and swam across for canoes lying on the opposite bank. Using the stolen canoes, the Cherokee and Lower Creek warriors crossed the river in increasing numbers, attacking and burning the village of Tohopoka from the rear. At 12:30 in the afternoon, Jackson saw smoke from Tohopoka rising from the treetops and heard gunshots fired from within the bend. Realizing Coffee's force had somehow engaged the Red Sticks from the rear, Jackson launched his attack. The drums beat the long roll, sounding the advance, and with bayonets fixed, the regulars swept forward. The first to scale the walls was Major Lemuel Montgomery of the 39th United States Infantry. He was also one of the first to fall, a bullet through the head. The fighting was fierce and the carnage was dreadful. One participant of the battle later wrote, "Arrows, spears, and balls were flying, swords and tomahawks were gleaming in the sun." The Red Sticks fought desperately, but they were outgunned as well as outnumbered. Many tried to escape by swimming the river, but Coffee's men shot them before reaching the opposite bank. Midway through the battle, Jackson offered the remaining warriors a chance to surrender, but they simply fought that much harder. Slowly, the Red Sticks were isolated, overpowered, and killed one by one. The battle ended. Darkness covered the bend. In the narrow confines of the bend, Over 800 Red Stick warriors died that day. 557 counted on the battlefield. 300 estimated shot in the river. The prophet Manahi was found among the dead, killed by grape shot fired from a cannon. Jackson's force lost 49 killed and 154 wounded. Many of these wounded died in the coming weeks. Some 350 women and children became prisoners of the Cherokee and Lower Creek warriors. Manawa escaped the slaughter. Suffering from 7 wounds, he lay among the dead until nightfall. Making his way to the river, he climbed into a canoe and disappeared into the darkness. The Battle of Horseshoe Bend brought to an end both the Creek War and the power of the Creek Nation. A few weeks after the battle, William Weatherford surrendered to Jackson in his camp near the ruins of Fort Toulouse, an old French fort built at the confluence of the Coosa and Tallapoosa rivers. Though not present at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend, Weatherford was wanted for the brutal attack on Fort Mims. "I am in your power. Do with me as you please," Weatherford said. "If I had an army, I would yet fight and contend to the last. But I have none. My people are all gone. I can now do no more than weep over the misfortunes of my nation." Moved by his dignity, Jackson allowed Weatherford to leave free and in peace. On August 9, 1814, General Jackson and a gathering of Creek chiefs signed the Treaty of Fort Jackson. In signing, the Creek ceded nearly 23 million acres of land to the United States. A large portion of this land became the state of Alabama. Ironically, only one Red Stick chief signed the treaty. The other chiefs had been allied to the United States during the war. The victory at Horseshoe Bend opened new lands for thousands of American settlers. Rapidly, they built new homes, farms, and towns on what had so recently been Creek land. The victory also thrust Andrew Jackson into a position of national prominence. Jackson became a major general in the United States Army after.
As a result of the loss, the Creek were forced to surrender over 22 million acres. Further land cessions would follow. In 1824, John Calhoun established the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and in 1825, Chief McIntosh surrendered the remaining portions of Georgia and Alabama. The Upper Creeks, led by Manawa, would execute him. In 1832, Abitli Yohola leads the remaining 8,000 of his own people on the 1,200-mile Trail of Tears.
A New Englander passing through western Kentucky noted the sad procession. 2,000 people, sick and feeble, many near death. One woman was carrying her youngest child who was dying in her arms. The Indians buried 14 or 15 at every stopping place.
The United States gained a lot of land.
In 1827 to 1838, approximately 23,000 tribal members were forcibly marched on the painful journey to Indian Territory. An estimated 3,500 Creeks died on the trail. An estimated 2,500 Creeks, considered to be prisoners, were shackled and placed on board steamboats at Montgomery, Alabama. 300 died tragically on the steamboat Monmouth in the Mississippi River. The final removal took place in the winter of 1838 when 500 Creek families were forced to leave their homes. Many of the tribal towns brought with them their sacred fire, which helped them preserve on their long journey from their homeland. This fire was the focal point for many tribal towns as they established roots in their new land. The first thing funded by the Creeks after removal was the tribal school system. It was funded from the annuities and consisted of 7 boarding schools for the Indian children, 3 boarding schools for the descendants of freedmen, and 65 day schools, including Tallahassee Manual Labor School, which is located 10 miles north of Mvskoke. Coweta Mission Day School was opened in 1843. Ironically, the Upper Creek settled in the lower half of the nation, and the Lower Creek settled in the upper half. The Creek Council was created with the House of Kings and the House of Warriors, and eventually moved into the historic council house that is now in downtown Okmulgee. Before Oklahoma, the 5 tribes attempted to make their own state called Sequoia. It was near historic Muskogee, Oklahoma. The government forced Indian Territory and Oklahoma Territory together. Upon the incoming state, Chitto Harjo famously told the United States Senate, "I stood here first, and Columbus first discovered me. He was leading the snake movement from Hickory Ground, south of present-day Henrietta. The allotment issued 160 acres to each family and allowed for the creation of the state of Oklahoma. That is why the Muskogee Creek Nation is one of the tribes in the state seal.